Starts off, you feel a bit tired, you've got less energy, less drive. You can't think straight.
Imagine being just 15 years old and becoming Britain's youngest female double murderer. Now imagine that one of your victims was your own father. This isn't the plot of a horror film. This is the true story of Lorraine Thorpe, a case so shocking that it forced an entire nation to ask, how could society allow a child to fall so far in the summer of 2009? The quiet market town of Ipswich became the backdrop to one of the most brutal and disturbing murder cases in British history. What you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about childhood innocence, and it will leave you questioning where we draw the line between victim and perpetrator. This is a story of torture, manipulation, and a darkness that consumed a young girl's soul. On a Sunday morning in August 2009, police in Ipswich forced their way into a flat on Victoria Street after a concerned neighbour reported not seeing the resident for several days. What they found inside would haunt even the most experienced officers. Lying on a mattress, partially covered by a duvet, was the body of 41-year-old Rosalind Hunt, known to friends as Rosie. The scene was immediately recognized as suspicious. All the windows were open, a telltale sign that decomposition had already begun. But it was the injuries on her body that told the real story of her final days. Rosalind had suffered 9 broken ribs, numerous injuries to her chest and abdomen, and evidence of systematic torture. The pathologist determined she had been alive when most of these injuries were inflicted. This wasn't a quick death. This was prolonged, calculated brutality. Detective investigators quickly learned that Rosie had been a well-liked woman in her community, despite struggling with severe alcohol addiction. After separating from her husband, she had fallen into Ipswich's street drinking community, a tight-knit but volatile group of homeless and semi-homeless alcoholics who looked out for each other, but also preyed upon the vulnerable among them. As police began interviewing neighbors and members of this community, 2 names kept surfacing repeatedly: Paul Clark, a 41-year-old ex-serviceman with a history of violence, and shockingly, a 15-year-old girl named Lorraine Thorpe. What happened next elevated this case from horrific to almost unbelievable. Less than 24 hours after finding Rosalind's body, police discovered a second victim. Desmond Thorpe, an alcoholic street drinker, was found dead on a sofa in a flat in Limerick Close, just 2 miles away. He had been smothered with a cushion. And here's where this case takes its most disturbing turn. Desmond Thorpe was Lorraine's father. On August 10th, police arrested both Paul Clark and 15-year-old Lorraine Thorpe on suspicion of double murder. The investigation revealed a tale of manipulation, violence, and a vulnerable child who had been failed by every system designed to protect her. To understand how a 15-year-old girl could become involved in such heinous crimes, we need to go back to where it all began. Lorraine Thorpe's early years were relatively normal. She grew up with her parents and 3 siblings on a leafy suburban street in South Ipswich. She was described as outgoing, friendly, and kind. She had been diagnosed with ADHD and was taking medication to manage it. But in 2006, when Lorraine was just 12 or 13 years old, everything changed. Her parents separated, and the family unit completely collapsed. For a young girl already going through puberty and the emotional turbulence of early adolescence, this breakdown was catastrophic. Lorraine was placed into care, then returned to her mother, then went to live with her father. Each move pulled her further from stability and deeper into chaos. Her father, Desmond, descended into severe alcoholism and semi-homelessness after the separation. By age 14, Lorraine was spending most of her time living in the dangerous world of Ipswich's street drinking community, caring for her increasingly dependent father. She stopped attending school entirely. She stopped taking her ADHD medication, and she began drinking alcohol herself, exposing her developing teenage brain to substances that would further impair her judgment and impulse control. Social services did attempt to intervene multiple times, but Lorraine was headstrong and kept returning to the streets and to her father. The life she was living was completely inappropriate for a child. She was surrounded by drunk homeless men, exposed to constant violence, and learning all the wrong lessons about boundaries, relationships, and acceptable behavior. She was learning manipulation, dishonesty, and aggression instead of the social skills every teenager needs. It was in this toxic environment that Lorraine met Paul Clark. Clark was a particularly nasty individual who ruled over the street drinking community through fear and intimidation. He was violent, aggressive, and liked to brag about his time in the military. To vulnerable Lorraine, he became something like a father figure, someone who made her feel protected and special. He gave her a sense of belonging she desperately craved. But Paul Clark was no protector. He was a predator who saw in Lorraine someone he could completely control and manipulate. The relationship between Clark and Lorraine was the subject of intense speculation, but both denied any sexual component. What was clear was that Lorraine had become obsessed with Clark and would do anything he asked. She followed his example, adopting his violent and aggressive behaviors. In her mind, he was strong, and being associated with him made her feel powerful in a life where she had felt powerless for years. Rosalind Hunt's flat became a regular hangout for the street drinking group. She had her own council accommodation and, being kind-hearted despite her addiction, she allowed others to stay there, sometimes even when she wasn't present. Paul Clark essentially took over her space, and Rosalind felt increasingly unsafe, but unable to push back against him. The spark that ignited the violence came when Rosalind took Paul Clark's dog into town, and the dog tried to bite a child. Rosalind kicked or yanked the dog back by its chain, and seemed to revel in the violence. The torture lasted for days. On August 4th, a neighbor heard screaming and commotion from Rosalind's flat and called the police. Officers attended but got no answer when they knocked. They left without forcing entry. Rosalind was inside, badly injured and trapped. It was a missed opportunity that might have saved her life. Clark and Lorraine eventually moved Rosalind back to her own flat on Victoria Street. In a final cruel act, they forced her to swallow sleeping pills in an attempt to make her death look like suicide. Then they beat her until she died. Lorraine later told friends about the murder, laughing as she described the violence. She showed no remorse, no empathy, no recognition of the humanity of the woman they had tortured to death. The jury heard testimony from members of the street drinking community, witnesses who were themselves alcoholics and drug addicts, making the proceedings particularly difficult. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. Lorraine's behavior during the trial was disturbing. She laughed and giggled with Paul Clark as if the proceedings were a joke. She was given regular breaks due to her ADHD and would look around the court, smile, and giggle, disrupting the solemnity of the proceedings. The defense argued that Lorraine, as a minor under Clark's control and influence, should not be held fully responsible for her actions. They painted a picture of a girl who had little chance of a normal life and had been manipulated by an older, violent man. But the prosecution and ultimately the judge disagreed. While acknowledging that Lorraine had been heavily influenced by Clark, the judge was clear that she could tell the difference between right and wrong. She had willingly participated in the violence. She had enjoyed it. She had bragged about it. She had acted independently at times, showing cunning and manipulation. After more than 17 hours of deliberation, the jury returned unanimous guilty verdicts for Rosalind Hunt's murder and a 10-2 majority verdict for Desmond Thorpe's murder. Paul Clark was sentenced to a minimum of 27 years in prison. He refused to leave his cell for the sentencing. In 2014, he was found dead in his cell at Wakefield Prison with a ligature around his neck, an apparent suicide. Lorraine Thorpe, taking into account her age and the circumstances, she was diagnosed with ADHD but stopped receiving treatment. She was removed from dangerous situations only to be allowed to return. She was exposed to violence, addiction, and manipulation during the most critical years of her development. If this case has affected you, if it's made you think about the vulnerable children in your own community, or if you simply want to stay informed about true crime cases that reveal important truths about society, then please hit that subscribe button right now. Like this video to help it reach more people who need to hear these stories. And turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into cases that matter. Together, we can raise awareness about the systems that fail our most vulnerable, and maybe, just maybe, prevent the next tragedy. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.